You have your Bibles, if you can please turn to Matthew 13. And I want to read from verse 24, Matthew 13, verse 24. Matthew 13, of course, is the passage where Jesus shares a number of different parables around the kingdom of God. We have the mustard seed and the yeast and the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, the parable of the net, sower and the seed, and so on. And in the midst of all of these parables, he shares a parable of the tares and the wheat, or the weeds as it is translated in more recent translation. Then Jesus told them another parable. Kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. And when the wheat sprouted and formed ears, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. Servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." So far, may God bless his word to us. And now we turn to the chapter we're going to focus on today, which is Revelation 14, and follows the whole account that we saw last week of the beasts that came out of the sea, the beasts that came out of the earth. In other words, the Antichrist, whose number is 666. Pretty bleak picture of these days in the final judgment of God. So now we turn to verse 1 of chapter 14. "Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps, and they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, Fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. and the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the marks of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God, who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." Just so far. We'll read the other section a little later. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you again for yet another opportunity just to come together as your people to hear your word to us. We thank you that we can listen to this word in peace, that we can come into this peaceful environment where there's no war, there's no turmoil, no anguish, that we can just come and sit at your feet and learn what you are saying to your church concerning these end times. Lord, give us ears to listen. Help us not to be distracted by the wiles of the enemy, who will seek to take our focus off these important things that will unfold in these end times. So open our hearts to receive your word. Sow your word in our hearts, we ask, in Jesus' name. So chapter 14 is really like a table of contents for what's coming later. We're still part of that parenthesis of a number of chapters, that breather in between the trumpets and the bowls of judgment. This is the last chapter before we start moving into the bowls of judgment. John answers two vital questions. First of all, what will become of those who refuse to take the mark of the beast and are killed? And secondly, what will happen to the beast and his accomplices? And so chapter 14 really prepares the way for the climactic events which will follow from chapter 15 onwards. And so this chapter really gives us a backward glance to the beginning of the tribulation and a forward glance to the end of the tribulation, when Jesus will set up his earthly kingdom for 1,000 years. And it's that picture that we have at the beginning of chapter 14. And I want to again emphasize that Revelation is not written chronologically. So all these events do not necessarily follow in order. And so here we are seeing a scene when God will gather his own around his throne. And so we open the chapter with this comforting image of all the people of God. The Lamb is standing on Mount Zion with the redeemed. And John is assuring all the believers of their ultimate victory in the Lamb. We looked at this number of 144,000 back in Revelation 7. We said it was symbolic of believers. Etched on their foreheads, as opposed to the number 666, is the name of the Lamb. These are sons and daughters of God, and their unswerving loyalty and commitment is expressed in biblical imagery. It speaks of the fact that they are virgins, or those who kept themselves pure. And this draws attention to their spiritual purity or chastity. In the Old Testament, Israelites frequently turned away from God and worshipped other gods and idols. And they committed a kind of spiritual adultery. In this context, the redeemed are called virgins because they acknowledge and confess that Jesus alone is Lord. They have not defiled themselves. It says they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. True believers in Christ are figuratively the pure bride of Christ. In the first century, you'll remember that Christians had to make a choice. Is Caesar Lord or is Jesus Lord? And those who chose Jesus were persecuted and killed. In the end times, believers will have to make a similar choice. Is the beast of the sea Lord, or is the Lamb of God Lord? And those who choose the Lamb break into song and rejoicing that only they can sing. They also described here as the first fruits. Now, again, that imagery comes from the Old Testament, where Israel was commanded to bring a portion of the early harvest of the land to the temple of God as an act of thanksgiving for the full harvest that would follow. And so metaphorically, this means they were those who belonged solely to the Lord. They were the first fruits. In the New Testament, believers are referred to as first fruits as well, and there are a whole lot of passages you can look up. So they are described as blameless. So those are the two images that are given. They are virgins and they are first fruits. So the vision of the Lamb on Mount Zion, surrounded by 144,000, bearing his name, stands in stark contrast to the previous chapter we looked at, when all seemed lost, when there was the rise of the beast from the sea and from the earth, and we saw that they wreaked havoc and destruction on the earth, that people bowed down to worship them, and it seemed like they were winning the day. All seemed lost. And yet here, those believers are singing a new song in the presence of the Lamb. And the moral of the story is that fervent faith in the Lamb triumphs over any kind of demonic force or deception, or even economic deprivation. You remember that the beast imposed laws that those who would not bow down and worship him would suffer economically. But God will triumph over all of those things. So from that vision, that picture, we then move into three announcements from three angels. They anticipate and summarize the last series of judgments, the bowl judgments of God's wrath. And when those bowls of judgment are poured out, the Antichrist and his kingdom will be destroyed. So let's look at the announcements. The first announcement is that the eternal gospel will be preached. And that eternal gospel speaks far wider than the gospel we read about in the New Testament. It really addresses the fundamental offense humankind commits by failing to acknowledge God as creator. It is this denial in the human heart that in essence alienates anyone from God. And you do not believe that God created. And you listen to the exhortation, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. So here we have three commands that are given. The first command is to fear God. It refers to a holy fear that recognizes the sovereign authority and power of God to deal with humankind. Fear God. Then, number two, give him glory. Praise and honor that's due his name as the sovereign creator of the universe. And then the third command is to worship him who made. The word worship, we know, is to show reverence or respect. During the tribulation, people will be forced to fear and acknowledge the beast and his image. But here the angel is warning them to reject the beast, to not take the marks of the beast on their forehead or hand, but to worship God alone. Well, the question then is why? Why are they given this almost final warning? It's like the last word of respite that is given to these people as a warning to worship God alone. Well, the first reason is quite obvious, because the hour of his judgment has come. So the judgment's about to take place. The bowls of his wrath are about to be unleashed. The second reason, though, is not as obvious, and that is that God has revealed himself through his creation. Throughout the ages, creation has called humankind to recognize God's existence and to seek after him. And I'm amazed by those who claim that science opposes creation or opposes the biblical account of creation. And as someone who studied science for 4 years, albeit a long time ago, I cannot understand anybody thinking that science in any way or reason is opposed to how the Bible describes God as the creator. When you think about it, science originally, the endeavor of science was the pursuit of truth. But sadly, over the centuries, it has been taken over by secular scientists who insist on naturalistic explanations for everything we see around us. And they deny any evidence to the contrary. Psalm 19 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." It's a declaration that God created the heavens and the earth. If you go back to Kepler, in the 16th century, he was known as the divine mathematician. Not because he had any divine insight, but he believed God to be the divine mathematician, whose mind could only be discovered in the precise mechanics of the universe. And he said the more he explored the universe, he felt he was more and more coming face to face with an intelligence that designed it. And it drove him to greater heights of pursuit. So Isaac Newton, anyone who's studied science, even at school, will know the name Isaac Newton, who pretty much invented calculus, mechanics, optics, and so much more. He made the famous statement, and I quote, "This most beautiful system of sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." What is also quite interesting about Isaac Newton, yes, he was a Christian, but he actually wrote a 1,000,000-word commentary on the books of Daniel and Revelation. Here's a scientist who wrote a theological book on Daniel and Revelation and showed as much interest in the things we're talking about in this series as we are. The Apostle Paul made this observation in Romans 1. "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what is being made." In other words, God has revealed himself in his creation, so that people are without excuse. And then he says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened." If ever there's a time in which we live, and see this happening, it is now. People do not glorify God as the creator of the universe. Paul says in their thinking, they became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. And so here we have the first announcement of the eternal gospel that will be preached almost one final time. The second announcement, and as you go through these announcements, they become more and more dramatic and more somber and frightening. The second announcement is in verse 8, is the fall of Babylon. A second angel announced the fall of Babylon the Great. Then another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has made all nations drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Now, Babylon comes from the Greek word that comes from a Hebrew word, Babel, which means confusion and really reflects what happened in Genesis 11 with the building of the tower, you remember. The name was given to the ancient city of Babylon, started by Nimrod, which we read about in Genesis 10 and 11. And we learn more about that in chapter 17. Now, most scholars believe that this Babylon is not necessarily a literal city, but some political power or a religious, political, and commercial system of the world symbolized by the word Babylon. The warning is against putting one's trust in the system as it exists in the world today and tomorrow, as it will be under the judgment of God and is doomed together with the world. The reference to wine here, when nations will drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, refers to that which intoxicates and disorients. And here what intoxicates are the secret mysteries and false and idolatrous doctrines that Satan will use to turn nations away from God. This is the wine that intoxicates a world that seeks security and happiness in riches and pleasures rather than in God himself. And so Babylon will fall. The system, this political, economic system will eventually fall. And the angel is called to announce that. Then we come to the third announcement, which is a warning. The third angel appears and announces that those who accept the mark of the beast are destined to experience God's wrath. There's no way to soap this. The warning is pretty clear. It's frightening. So we read, "Those who worship the beast and its image and receive a mark on their foreheads or on their hands will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger. And they will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image, and for anyone who receives the mark of its name." The imagery adopted here for this punishment comes from the Old Testament. The word mixed or unmixed is a Greek word which is used in preparation of wine by the addition of special spices or water. And in ancient times, wine was mixed with water, diluted to reduce its effect, as it is today. Or it was mixed with other ingredients that heighten its effect, that was used in many of the ancient Babylonian religions. But what it says here is that God's wrath will be unmixed. In other words, there will be no portion of grace or mercy in God's wrath. And so his wrath is compared to undiluted wine, fire and sulfur, not a tasty blend at all. The first metaphor stresses the potency of God's judgment. The second recalls the devastation of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. What is particularly difficult is the seemingly unending nature of this judgment. We read, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. This is not just a one-off thing. This is something that will go into eternity. And we'll look at more at those judgments later. So up to now we have this bad news. But now a fourth voice comes along. From heaven with a word of exhortation to the faithful, encouraging them to hold fast to the faith of Jesus. And so this voice, probably God himself, is a direct communication rather than him communicating through an angelic messenger. Why? Because of the importance of the message. But more so because God is interested in showing compassion and bringing comfort to his people. It shows God's personal care for his people. It's like a beatitude, pronouncement of blessing upon those who obey God's word. Now, in Scripture, a beatitude is always seen as a reversal of man's point of view by setting forth God's point of view, God's values, his priorities. And so to those who obey the beast and worship him, that enjoyment of life, you know, the whole adage of eat, drink, and be merry, that is more blessed than death. In fact, most people who do not believe fear death, and they live for the moment. They dread death. But for believers, God's viewpoint, which is why this is the beatitude, is a promise from his word that teaches exactly the opposite. To accept the beast is to forfeit trusting in Jesus Christ, and so to forfeit eternal life. As Christians, we know, friends, that death is not the end. It's only a beginning. And that is why the pronouncement, blessed are the dead, happy are the dead, who from now on die in the Lord. It's not something to be dreaded. And interestingly, this is one of those biblical passages that speaks of the threefold nature of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If you go look at it carefully. The other interesting about this beatitude or this blessing, when it says blessed are, is that it's the second of 7 blessings in Revelation. Again, we come across this number 7. 7 blessings, and we've given you a whole lot of references. I encourage you to go and look them up. So those who die in the Lord are blessed. So there are the 3 announcements. The eternal gospel, the announcement that Babylon has fallen, and then this final announcement that is given, which speaks of those who take the mark and those who don't. But then we just read this last section. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had a sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle to the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. And they were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Again, frightening scene. And so we now move to the last section, which is the harvesting and the grapes of wrath. What's this all about? Well, after the brief pause to comfort the saints, John now returns to the subject of God's divine wrath being poured out on earth. And he does so looking at these two pictures, the picture of the harvest by which God harvests the earth, and by way of the 7 last plagues, the 7 bold judgments which are poured out on the earth. And so the vision here in chapter 14 symbolically portrays the final act of God's judgment in the last days of the tribulation, comprising these 7 last plagues. And then it kind of culminates in the Battle of Armageddon, when all nations are gathered together in the valley of Megiddo. And again, there are a whole lot of references that you can look up there. So we are given the final declaration of the defeat of the beast and his system, Babylon, which had appeared to be so successful in chapter 13. But it was really temporary. Satan's success for the first 3.5 years of that 7-year tribulation is only temporary. God was allowing the wickedness of humankind to really ripen to its zenith, to its pinnacle. And when it reached its full extent, then God would bring about his final judgment. And so we find the reapers. Who are the reapers here? Well, it talks about, I saw the Son of Man on a cloud. Son of Man, as we read in the Gospels, always points to Jesus Christ and emphasizes his humanity as the one who came to die for humankind, but also the one who will one day judge the world. So the issue is when people reject Christ and his word, they will face him as their judge. It says he's got a golden crown on his head. It says having a golden crown on his head. Not will have, but having. It's in the present continuous tense. It's a condition that emphasizes that this crown is permanent. It is golden, symbol of deity, of value, of that which is imperishable, of righteousness. The word crown is the Greek word stephanos, which refers to a victor's crown. So the picture we have here, friends, is Christ coming victoriously as a conqueror, having the right power, the right and the power to do so as the victorious Savior. And then we come to a second reaper. They are the various angels mentioned before who came out of the temple. In other words, they came out of the presence of God. And what are they crying? Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come. For the harvest of the earth is ripe. And when it says the harvest is ripe, it's saying that the harvest of evil is ripe. In other words, evil has escalated to this point of no return. And now it's time for God to bring his final judgment. So God the Father is giving directions to the Son of Man to execute the final judgments, the final bold judgments through this angelic messenger. So those are the reapers. Okay, you still with me? Hello? Okay, not far to go. We're in the last lap, okay? Son of Man points to Jesus, emphasizes humanity, golden crown on his head, symbol of deity, and of course, the crown speaks of being victorious. Okay, so he's told to take the sickle and reap the earth, and that's what he does. Now we look at the reaping. We have a two-part, multi-layered, harvest-themed vision. In the first harvesting, an angel tells the Son of Man sitting on the white cloud, holding a sharp sickle, to reap the harvest of the earth. That's the first harvesting as such. The second harvesting, another angel tells different angels to hold a sickle to the harvest grapes, which are thrown into the winepress and they are trampled. Now, in terms of the reaping, who's in view here? Who's being reaped? Is it believers? Is it unbelievers? Is it both together? Well, that's why we read the parable, you remember, from Matthew 13, of the tares and the wheat, or the weeds and the wheat. And when Jesus explains the parable in verse 39 of that chapter, listen to what he says. Amazing. This is Jesus speaking 2,000 years ago. And we're looking at a time that is somewhere in the future, thousands of years in the future. But notice what Jesus says, and now think about what is being said here in Revelation 14. The harvest, Jesus says, is the end of the age. And the harvesters are angels, or that's what we read about here. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man, well, he's one of the harvesters, will send out his angels, and they will weed out, here we talk about a sickle, they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, earlier in that parable that we read, you remember Jesus said, let both grow together until the harvest. And at that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds, tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. So Jesus says the tares or the weeds are unbelievers. But of course, believers live with unbelievers in this world. The wheat are the believers. And while the angels are gathering the weeds for judgment, those who are believers, those who are righteous in God's sight because of his righteousness, they are left on earth when the kingdom is established. And so God's sickle is God's judgment upon unbelieving people who reject Jesus as the Messiah and Savior. So the reapers, Son of Man, angel. In one case it's the dry wheat, in the other case it's grapes. The reason for the, so it's believers and unbelievers, it's actually unbelievers. The reason for the reaping, because the earth is ripe, withered or dry, and the grapes are fully ripe. In other words, wickedness has reached its zenith. So the picture, as we move to the last part of this passage, the results of the reaping, the picture that is portrayed here is the coming of Christ to engage in the final battle of Armageddon in the valley of Megiddo. And the metaphor moves from the wheat, dry wheat, and the harvest thereof, to that of the earth becoming like a great vine full of clusters of grapes ready for the winepress. Grapes that are literally like bursting with wickedness and evil. And they are ready for the winepress of God's judgment. What is amazing, if you look at Deuteronomy 32, and we're not even looking back at Christ now, we're now looking at thousands of years before that when Deuteronomy was written. Listen to these words. The vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison and their clusters with bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents, the deadly poison of cobras. Have I not kept this in reserve and sealed it in my vaults? And then God says, it is mine to avenge. I will repay. Because remember what we said. God is saying, don't take matters into your own hands. God says, it is mine to avenge. In due course, hold fast, he says. Persevere, remain faithful. And it says here, in due time, their foot will slip. Their day of disaster is near, and their doom rushes upon them. It's amazing that you have a prophetic word like this right at the beginning of the Old Testament, tying up with Revelation 14. This day has come. And the last two verses, verses 19 and 20, describe the result of this reaping in pretty gory details. The winepress trodden outside the city with the blood, coming out from the press, refers to the gathering of all the nations in the valley of Megiddo to the north of Jerusalem. This great battle with Jesus Christ, who is the commander-in-chief. It's described in Revelation 19 that we'll get to. This will result, friends, in the bloodiest battle the world has ever known. We read that from this battle, blood will flow, literally like grape juice from a winepress. From the north of Palestine, in this valley of Megiddo, south down through the Jordan Valley, through the whole of Palestine. But you know what is even more remarkable here? Is that this bloodbath is going to be executed by none other than Jesus Christ himself. You see, in the first advent, Jesus came as a meek and mild baby who grew up and gave his life as a ransom for many, who, as Isaiah tells us, was like a lamb silent before his shearers. And that's the kind of Jesus we probably picture when we think of Jesus. Picture of Jesus in this passage is nothing like that. It's a very different Jesus. He's coming as a mighty conqueror in the full wrath of a holy God on the universe. And so Jesus will bring about this final destruction through these 7 bowls of judgment that we're going to look at next week. Chapter 15 and 16, we'll look at it together. Because that tells us about what these bowls of judgment, bowls of wrath are. They're actually frightening images. And remember the exhortation that is given here, that we need to hold fast. We need to hold fast. So there you have chapter 14. Picture of those who stand before the throne on Mount Zion, the redeemed. And a picture of what awaits those who reject Jesus as Savior of the world. Again, friends, the question always that we pose at the end of every one of these messages is, in which camp are you, truly? Are you going to be on the one side or the other? If this week an announcement had to be made by some ruler of the world who somehow had sway over the whole world, that we would have to take the mark if we were to purchase anything in our shops, how many of us would take the mark? This is not just apocalyptic writing and just, something that we can just think about as some symbolic language and whatever. Folks, this is going to happen. Believe me, it's going to happen. God's word tells us, and everything in God's word points to this time, these end times. Now I want to close as the musicians please come forward. Because we're going to close with that hymn that we've been singing a few times already. So we've been singing this over quite a few weeks. And the coming of the Lord, just get the focus back, please. Okay, can you just move it along then? Just move it on. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Carry on. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. There's the sickle. His truth is marching on. What is quite fascinating about this is known as the Battle of the Republic. It's a hymn that is loved by all Americans because it came out of the Civil War in the middle of the 19th century. It was written by a woman who was a poet and a social worker who spoke out against slavery. She was an abolitionist. And she, together with her pastor, Reverend Clark, and other members of their church, went to the battleground of the Union forces. And while they were there, they saw the soldiers marching and humming the tune of John Brown's Body. And John Brown was an abolitionist who was executed because he dared to try and attack an armory, to take armaments from an armory, and 14 people were killed. And he was executed as an abolitionist. And after seeing this and hearing this tune, she then went back and wrote these words that Abraham Lincoln apparently sang quite often. And they represented really the heart of the Union against the evil of slavery from the South. And she saw the whole rise up of the North against the South as this final battle of almost Armageddon. And she wrote these words coming from Revelation chapter 14, speaking of that. And what is even more fascinating is this became a battle cry throughout America over the centuries. Martin Luther sang these words the day before he was, Martin Luther King, that is, before he was assassinated. Various presidents have had the song sung at their funeral, including Ronald Reagan. And what is more is Winston Churchill insisted in his will that this song be sung at his funeral, and that was in 1965. And since then, it is sung all over the world. With 9/11, the memorial service, at the end of the memorial service for 9/11, they sang this as well. It's called the battle cry of the Republic. But we know as Christians, this is really our battle cry. It speaks of exactly what we've spoken about in Revelation 14. His truth is marching on. And then we sing that wonderful chorus. So as we sing these words, it's to remember Julia Ward, what's her surname? Howe. Howe. She wrote this song as a poet and a social worker. And she had in mind the evil of slavery, but we have in mind the evil that will rise up in this world. So let's stand, and we're going to sing this together as we declare his truth is marching on. While we do that, we will ask those to wait on us for the offering.